hopefully we get some confirmation of that, folks. Anybody? Brett?
I'm checking LinkedIn. LinkedIn had issues earlier today, so we'll see.
Okay.
And Dan Ruski.
It's up on Facebook.
Okay, I'm getting that as well. So we're up on Facebook. We're checking LinkedIn.
All right, let's see what we got on LinkedIn.
Ooh, Keith, that's better.
Yeah, I was realizing that I was obscuring the other one.
Yeah.
Okay, it's on Steve's profile, right? Let's see.
Yep.
It's on Twitter too, right? Somewhere? Yeah,
I'm hoping.
In theory.
Anyone want to check that?
I'm gonna see if I can. Is that
Let's
on
not
just
take
on
too
the?
much time checking.
Okay.
We have a hard stop at noon for Keith and probably.
Yeah.
It's
Brent,
live now on LinkedIn. Yeah, I got a hard stop.
All
Okay.
right. Well, that's enough. So.
All right. So
All
Tina,
right,
do
so
the
here we
intro.
go. We're mute is off, and we're gonna go in 3, 2, 1, and
Hi, Steve Gillmor here. This is the Gillmor Gang. It's Friday and the world is in tatters. First of all, I just want to say that all of our hearts go out to the brave and miraculously democratic country of Ukraine. And we hope for the best and fear the worst. Joining us from London is Frank Radis. Welcome, Frank.
Hi, Steve. Hi, gang.
And a little lower third music, please.
Hi, Steve. Hi, gang. Thanks for having me.
beautiful.
Beautiful. Joining us from the Seattle area is Michael Markman.
How do you do, gang? All of you and people out there in streaming land. Glad to be here. Is that enough lower third? I hope so.
Yep.
We can only pray to the lower third gods. In Palo Alto, California is Keith Tier.
Pleasure to be here on the day that Roman Abramovich is poised to sell Chelsea Football Club, which is wonderful for us Manchester United fans.
The only thing I understood about that was the word football.
And it's not the same game.
Exactly. Joining us from the Atlanta, Georgia area is Brent Leary.
That was actually Dr. Keith Tier, by the way.
Oh,
Yeah,
So
congratulations.
Well,
Yeah.
not
Tip of the hat.
until April the 1st. And given that it's April the 1st, even I wonder.
That's pretty funny. I hadn't
So
thought
that's
of that.
for us to say when we all on April 1 say congratulations.
Well,
You'll have to examine each of those for sincerity.
Can we get Keith to explain what we're congratulating him about?
Yeah, after we start the show, which we
All right.
want to say welcome to the Commonwealth State of Massachusetts and its resident Dennis Pombriand.
That's right. There's only one of us here. And it's me. And
Yeah,
I'm here
We're the
with
cats.
you
You
up
have
here
cats.
in the ether.
Okay,
Hey, what's
so
my password?
Cats.
passwords on second. The Keith Tier, would you explain what we were not talking about just a minute ago?
My university where I did my undergraduate degree and did not complete my PhD has decided in its wisdom to give me an honorary doctorate for my contribution to entrepreneurship, no less.
Woo.
So there you go.
Round of applause.
So, and where is this located?
It's the University of Kent at Canterbury. So Canterbury is where Canterbury Cathedral is. Any of you who ever read Dickens know all about Canterbury and Dover and all that part of the world.
That's just a tale.
Exactly, Canterbury Tales, which is not Dickens,
Nice.
Chaucer.
Yeah,
Anyway.
Keith, they called me a couple of weeks ago for a reference, and I said, yeah, give them a PhD.
That must have been a week where we agreed.
Wow.
We
I don't
always
think
agree.
there's been a week. What? What?
Oh, we agree
What?
quite a lot these days, I must say.
I was just hoping somebody would recognize that I shaved in honor of Keith's doctorate. So
Trimmed, I'd say, cleaned up.
cleaned up. Yes.
Shaved is too big a word for that growth on your face.
I still am rocking a new LA Rams Super Bowl hat that had never been worn before. So
There you go.
Sorry, we're muting for the purpose of excising the one of our dogs from the conversation.
Why?
Why not?
Okay. Okay.
Why
I
have
have
a
something
dog
to
if you
say.
can mute them?
The dog was barking because the daughter was leaving the building, and she likes to announce that.
All
well,
right.
dang.
Wow. Okay,
All right, folks.
so
Michael, what about Michael? Did you forget Michael, or did
No,
I
no.
forget Michael?
I forgot nobody.
There you go. I was going to say, Michael, you're a tiny head at the bottom of the
No,
screen.
I did one.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
remember it was really formal and we called him.
Oh, yeah.
You even discussed my.
No, yeah. See how
Introduction.
quickly I forget.
It's very ephemeral.
I keep forgetting a lot lately. I don't get it.
It
What?
reminds me of
What?
reminds me of when my kids were like 1.5. I did one.
Wow.
Well,
I guess we don't have to worry about subject matter, pardon the expression. Okay. Dennis, you had some thoughts that you wanted to explore.
Oh, Jesus, this thing. Okay, I'll put it down. Never mind. So what? Here's something interesting. I think we need to find. I think we need to treat Russia and Vladimir like a child with ADD, and we need to keep them constantly busy. And it seems to me that the space program did that twice, once in the 60s and again in the 80s with Ronnie Reagan and Star Wars. And I think each time it avoided probably a face-to-face confrontation. We came really close in 62 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then things kind of smoothed out and things were looking a little worse in the late 70s. And Ronald Reagan came in and announced Star Wars, and all of a sudden the Russians had to find a way to catch up. It seems like they are really attracted to projects that require a lot of bending metal and rivets and a lot of math. And if that's the case, then I've got just the project for them. We need to put Russian, American, European, and Chinese best minds to fixing the climate. And I'm sure there would be a lot of metal bending for the Russians. So I'm only half joking. I think we should use this opportunity to explore that. Okay, next topic.
well, no, I'm trying to think how we would go about it. In the 60s, in my memory is that it was the Soviets who initiated the space race, and we were catching up. We didn't lure them into it; they lured us into it.
Actually, no. There was no space race until John Kennedy's address to Congress on May 25th, 1961, where he said we want to go to the moon. Before
No,
that,
I disagree with that. It started with Sputnik.
Yeah,
It started with Sputnik, and it started with Russia first sending a man to orbit the Earth when we were barely able to do suborbital flights, and Kennedy was in response to that.
Yuri Gagarin.
Yes,
Yeah.
you don't have a race until you have two competitors.
Yeah.
And in the 1950s, you didn't have a competitor. Alan Shepard only went up in April of 61. So
Yes, well,
if you want to call that the space race with Sputnik, go ahead. My point isn't that we should have another space race. My point is that we should have another metal bending exercise.
Actually, you're arguing for global cooperation in an extraterrestrial set of goals, which is the underlying idea, like the ISS.
Perhaps I think there's enough that needs to be done to actually have competition, not cooperation.
I think one of the obstacles to that is that Russia's income depends on fossil fuels at this point. So I don't know what their incentive is to move away from that.
Their incentive is that the planet's running out of petroleum, and we need to conserve as much of it as we can for the petrochemical industry, so that we can make things like everything from plastics to pharmaceuticals to fertilizers. We only burn about 65% of the petroleum that we pump out of the ground. The rest of it goes into things like that, car bumpers, tires. You know, it takes 7 gallons of petroleum to make one average car tire. 5 gallons make the rubber, 2 gallons run the process. So if the people who are sitting on lots and lots of oil were smart, I think they'd hang on to it as much as they could to fuel the petrochemical industry for the next century. And by the way, just because Keith's got an electric car doesn't mean everybody else does. So it's going to be a while people are going to be burning petroleum.
And my car still has rubber tires. What we need is an electric hover car.
Don't you have 2 of them?
I can just see Rush Hour with electric hover.
I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I did indeed sell 2 cars and buy 2 new ones.
So it sounds to me, Dennis, like that, you know, that's a cheer for alternative energy creation and a real deep dive into that, at least is something that could actually happen.
Nuclear power stations, I must say, is, in my opinion, a very, very big part of the solution, and the waste notwithstanding. And if fusion is real, even better. But even without fusion, it feels as if the sun and atoms are the 2 best, maybe the wind a bit as well, are the best sources of energy.
Of course, wind is powered by the sun as well.
This is not right.
What's that?
Wind is also powered by the sun. That's all I say.
Dennis, what were you saying?
I've done a deep dive on this, and it doesn't work that way. The best experts say that we're at least a century away from fusion. And as far as nukes are concerned, just look what's happening in a Eastern European country that we don't want to talk about with the nuclear power plants. Look at what happened at Fukushima. Look at what happened at Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. It's nukes had their day, and they came up short. In the same way that hydropower is coming up short now.
I would say, you know, in terms of the current situation, there, you know, what's the difference between a fairly modern nuclear power plant today and that mess that Gorbachev put together originally in Chernobyl, which, you know, was not tenable. And clearly wasn't tenable. I mean, it seems to me that there has been a tremendous amount of change in the actual infrastructure of what nuclear power plants are today, and that sort of speaks well for the nuclear industry. But I defer to you, Dennis, because that's an area that I know you know a lot about.
You know, what's really interesting is that, bear with me on this. The core of the Earth is molten. It's radioactive. It's been liquid since the Earth formed 4.6 billion years ago. That the heat in the center of the Earth, which is about 4,000 miles from where you're sitting, radiates out. And it's part of what keeps the planet warm. It's not just solar energy. that keeps the planet warm. Now, that heat radiates to the crust, and there are lots of places on the planet where you can tap into that heat, effectively using the Earth's core as a nuclear power plant without having all of the downside risk of explosions and what to do about the waste. And Keith right now is probably burning electrons from Sonoma Valley, where they generate about 673 megawatts from geothermal. And that's happening all over the place. It's not getting the play that nuclear or wind or solar get, but it's probably the more realistic option for going completely green.
So why aren't we doing it more?
Why aren't we doing it more? Do you know that Chevron made a big investment in geothermal about 12 months ago? You don't hear about that.
No, we just did.
Yeah,
And
you
you
gotta
know why
really-
we don't hear about it?
Because Chevron wants to sell every last drop of petroleum they own.
It's the water engine.
But Dennis, the scientist in me doesn't like the answer that says there's been accidents, therefore you can't do it. I mean, that if that was true, then almost every medical innovation, because it originally killed people, would never have become real. I think the human race is all about getting things wrong until you get it right, and the core science of nuclear energy is awesome.
It's unnecessary, though. I just replaced all the nuclear energy you could possibly generate, and cheaper and safer.
So why
Why
isn't it
don't-
happening?
You know what? Go to Google and type in geothermal and see what you get. You'll find there are projects all over the world. There are even some projects in southern England near Bath. You know how Bath got its name, right?
Hot water.
It was hot water, yeah. Where do you think that hot water comes from? It's a geothermal
Underground.
vent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think those monkeys can swim in that hot water?
So here's what Google says. There are 3 primary disadvantages of geothermal energy. A, it's location restricted. B, it has environmental side effects, including earthquakes. And 3, it has high costs and isn't sustainable.
Here's what, hey, Keith, would go to thinkgeoenergy.com. That's where you're going to find everything. And by the way, why don't you Google the hazards of nuclear energy?
Okay, well, that's all good.
I think this is an interesting back and forth. I'd like to hear, it sounds like a perception problem. If what Dennis is saying is true, it's already happening and is inevitably going to continue to happen. Would that be your position on this?
Yes, it would be.
Okay. So, and Keith's position is,
Well, actually, my position is okay with it in places where it's viable. Like I've been to Iceland and they use it there everywhere and it's fantastic.
Mhm.
Use it in Hawaii too.
Use it
Actually,
in Klamath Falls, Oregon, for that matter.
It's just not a human scale solution, I don't think. But then I'm not an expert. I'm just I'm prepared to take the other side so that Dennis can educate me.
If you
Okay.
look at the planet, it has a ridge of mountains that go around it like the stitching on a baseball. You drill a hole at the base of any of those mountains and you get lots of geothermal. There was a report out of MIT a few years ago that said there's enough geothermal energy under the Rocky Mountains to supply 1,000 times the necessary electricity for the United States for the foreseeable future.
So it's basically a controlled volcano, if you think about it in that way. It's releasing not just heat, but energy. Obviously, it's a bit unpredictable what happens when you put a hole into something. The pressure that is released needs to be contained. Like you've seen those oil wells that can't contain the sudden oil surge. So, I mean, it does feel as if the engineering challenges are not to be underestimated. And the engineering challenge of building a nuclear power station is not to be underestimated either. They all require control over variables, but I would imagine the Earth is a pretty hard variable to control most of the time.
I got all the engineering right here.
Of course you have.
I did deep research on this. This shit works.
Okay, well, there's the
And-
new show.
You know, I would not be a fan of nuclear energy. I wouldn't go out of my way to stop it. I just think that if you look at the economics, it's a better deal to go with geothermal.
Having stood directly in sight of 3 Mile Island, I am also not a real fan of nuclear energy. That was probably one of the scariest times of my life, and when everyone was handed a dosimeter before they came and covered that story. And it interestingly enough, as a crazy little aside, at the exact same time that happened, the movie The China Syndrome came out at the exact same, I think that day or the day after or the day, because those of us who were there went and saw that movie, and every one of us came out of there going, what are we doing here? This is crazy.
But I'm guessing every one of us on this show is pro science. You must, and you said it, Frank, earlier. I read a comparison to modern nuclear power stations compared to the Japanese one that leaked when the earthquake happened. And it does seem as if safety is not really an issue anymore.
Dennis?
The Japanese, are you saying the Japanese nukes did a good job?
No, they did a
containment?
bad job, but
Because
they were old.
they
They
were
were
built by
old.
General Electric, you know.
Yeah, but they're decades old. The stuff I read says that a modern nuclear power plant both has a much smaller core and much more protected and fail safes and blah, blah. Certainly the reading I did suggested you don't have to worry about safety. That said, I'm aware that all science is paid for by self-interested parties who want a certain outcome, including geothermal probably. So you can't actually trust a single source, even when it's science-based. You have to look at multiple sources because they're all paid for by profit-making enterprises that, you know, it's like, is mother's milk better than baby powder milk? And you'll find research on both sides paid for by different people.
The baby
yeah.
powder folks are probably paying people to say that.
I think they're
Hey.
called Nestle. Well, you know, there are some interesting nuclear designs. So, for example, instead of using fuel rods and raising them or lowering them, depending on how much reactivity you want to get, and insulating them with lead and all kinds of things like that, there's a design that takes fuel and pelletizes it and then covers it with, I think, ceramic or something, so that you can't get more than a certain amount of critical mass. So all you can get is heat rather than an explosion. Okay, that's all well and good, but I want to refer you to the first Jurassic Park movie.
If you do that, I'm going to talk about For All Mankind, where the Russians landed on the moon first.
Okay, good.
Oh,
Yeah, but
that's
I'll
a
go
great
first.
show. That's a
I'll
great
go
show,
first.
by the way.
I'll go first. The character of the mathematician played by Dr. Malcolm, played by what was it, Steve? He's tall guy.
Funny
Goldman.
guy, yeah, funny guy. I know who you mean.
Okay,
Piano
So-
player.
Yeah, exactly. Been on Colbert a few times. His big line in the movie was that nature always finds a way around whatever your best plans are.
I agree with. That's why I'm suspicious of geothermal, because hot molten lava may do something you don't expect.
Yeah, but if you,
there's no
but-
lava involved.
But
Hope for
I
the-
think
hope
I
for
think
the
his
best.
line was "life finds a way," so I don't think it applies to lava.
Jeff Goldblum.
yeah,
Yeah, that's it.
you
Yeah.
plan for the best, you hope for the best, and you plan for the worst. That's
Mel
my,
Brooks.
Yeah, actually, there's no molten anything. Here's a piece of granite from the Rocky Mountains, and it would be this that you would be drilling into. Now, heat has a wonderful property of flowing, just like a liquid, through rocks. Liquids don't flow through rocks. But the point of the exercise is that you drill into this. It's really hot. You use fracking technology that was first developed in the oil fields. You fracture a bed of this rock, and then you drill a second hole. The first hole, you pump water down. The second hole, you pump hot water out. And it's so hot that it produces superheated steam when it gets to the surface as it goes into the dynamo, which is what produces the force that drives the generator. So there's no molten anything. And then what's really cool is you recycle the water back down into the hole. It gets reheated and it comes back up hot, superheated steam. And it does that ad infinitum.
Have you taught this course? Because I'd take it.
Yeah, no, this is the one that I avoided successfully for 10 years.
Yeah, but he makes it interesting.
No, I'm we just got it, on the new real-time everything moves to TV network.
It's all here, Frank.
Oh, there you go.
Go ahead, Dennis, plug the
Yeah,
book.
if I held up my book, you would only say cats.
Cats, K-A-T-Z.
There you go.
Anyway, I'm all in favor of it where it's viable. I'm not against it at all.
Yeah. You know what's really cool is that since Andrew Jackson's time, we've been pushing Native Americans further west and into the desert, onto reservations. Guess where some of the best geothermal land is? It's under the reservations. Yeah.
So
But it's hard to get the water there.
You don't need a lot.
And remember, it recycles.
And we have pretty decent pipeline technology.
Presumably it can't use salt water because it would gum the works up.
If you engineered
Desalinization.
it, if you engineered it right, you could. I mean, you make saltwater swimming pools. You could, I suppose. You could also use.
If you could do that, then suddenly the ocean becomes more interesting.
Well, you can desalinate.
Well, what's real? Yeah. You generate power with that, and then you use the power to desalinate water to feed a very thirsty West Coast.
okay, so we're at the 31-minute mark here.
Wow, we've solved these problems here.
That's pretty good, Dennis.
Anything
Kudos
else?
to you.
Brent, anything interesting that you want to talk about?
Just try to watch what's on the TV behind you and
Yeah.
figure out what was going on there.
Yeah, Anthony Blinken is in Brussels talking to the allies. And basically it's, we're all on the same page.
The allies. I hate.
And now back to our movie.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about as this story has unfolded. I have a way of looking at it that may be a little different than the rest of you. First of all, if this had happened back when I was a field producer at ABC News, I would have been on one of the first planes out to go to cover this story. And I'm watching who would be my colleagues today and how they're doing it, and I'm astounded at quality of the coverage by almost everyone, including, and maybe more than you might imagine, and certainly more today than ever before, the user-generated content and the material that people are shooting on phones and feeding out on. And by the way, Starlink is actually happening, and the Ukrainians have said, you know, thank you, Mr. Musk, for helping us out with this. But they're getting signals out of there, and an awful lot of. I mean, I saw an interview with Zelensky the other day that was shot with a phone that looked like somebody took their iPhone 13 in there, and it looked as good as any camera that I've seen anywhere. Because I asked whether or not a couple of people who were involved in that told me that was a phone interview. I'm sure they're all not, but the technology has changed the face of this war, not only in what we're seeing and the content that we're consuming, but what it means in Russia to Putin, who is the kind of person that wants to control the message but can't control that message. There's an interesting story, by the way, that I posted, and that'll be posted on my newsletter tomorrow. I think I posted it on Facebook today. I should have put it on t.me/Gillmor Gang.
Gillmor Gang.
But I didn't. So it's about a girl whose mother lives in Russia and she lives in the Ukraine, and their communication is that the mother doesn't believe what the girl is going through, because the way the news that she's getting in Russia is completely different than what's really happening in Ukraine.
Well, doesn't that contradict what you previously said?
Well,
I mean, it's much harder to get the story into Russia than it is to get the story out of Ukraine.
Yes, it does. But
let's just try and leave little gaps, because the codec here is making it impossible to understand either of you when you're both talking.
Okay. Yes, it does. But it was just another example of sort of the way that this story is developing. I admit that one instance proves my thesis wrong. On the other hand, I don't think there's any doubt that the role that social media and the internet is playing in this story is far different than it ever has been before. I mean, some of the content that you've seen from the embeds has been shot by the embeds, and you know there's so many technology stories in what's going on. I personally wanted to ask Keith his opinion about whether or not cryptocurrency is going to sort of overturn the sanctions. Will it, and does that not speak sort of negatively about cryptocurrency, or does it say that's what cryptocurrency is all about?
I don't think cryptocurrency really impacts the sanctions, Frank, because that would have to be government level, and there'd have to be willing sellers against crypto. And I think the sanctions look to me as if they're incredibly solid, as in no one will do business with Russia. And whether you're paying in crypto, rubles, or dollars, you're just not going to get to buy anything from the outside. So now I do think crypto will play the role of a safe haven for ruble holders who were clever enough to buy Ethereum or Bitcoin a few weeks ago. I think it will play that role of preserving value against world currencies for those who got out of the ruble.
Well, I'm thinking
think the key word there is a few weeks ago, isn't it?
Yeah.
At this point, you can't afford crypto.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of, for example, an oligarch who sells his yacht before it's been taken away from him to someone who.
Oh yeah,
crypto.
well that's happening anyway. Abramovich is a good example of it, and they may well get paid in Bitcoin and stuff. Yeah, that's quite possible, but they can also get paid in dollars because these guys are not in Russia. These oligarchs are in Monaco and places like Monaco and the Maldives and so on. So, and they have Western bank accounts, mainly in Switzerland. So that they don't have the problem. It's the ordinary people that have the problem.
Now,
I also think there is a kind of an interesting, it's fairly clear. Did you see that Russian TV news presenter interviewing a guy, and the guy was making fun of the government, and it was all ironic. It was on Twitter yesterday. It seems very clear that most Russians are not fans of what's going on.
Hey, stop that.
There's also an interesting question: how do you engage Russians? How do you have a dialogue with ordinary Russians? Because probably Putin's greatest weakness is if his own population, turn on him, and it would seem that some of the cutting off the elite in Russia also undermines the ability to talk to ordinary people.
Well, there's more language than language. In other words, we are talking to Russia. When you look at the photos of people lining up to get to an ATM, we are communicating with ordinary Russians. The impact of the sanctions, I think, will be felt throughout Russia. How they interpret them, Putin will certainly say, "See, they're against us," but there's no question that we're going to be communicating to everyone in Russia.
And I think, but there's a weakness there, Michael, which is, it's like if you starve them, they'll revolt. Well, no, they won't. They'll get demoralized.
Well, I know it's not a simple matter, but there's definitely a strong filter that Putin and his regime are able to place over all communications in Russia, but it's not impermeable. And things like phone calls get through, and people are able to get onto VPNs and get information, but still Putin dominates. There's no question about that.
I had posted a thing on Facebook the other day where I said that that they had the Russians had blown up a television tower, and I said, yeah, that's something that could have worked about 20 years ago.
Right.
And a lot of people agreed with that. But one person said, which I thought was interesting, who took sort of the other side of that, which is that television tower may also have been a radio tower, which would have been an issue. I don't think it's that much of an issue. But the point of this is that kind of dissemination of information and the information consuming of the populace is not dependent on any of the sort of legacy media.
The BBC announced today that it's opening up shortwave radio broadcast, which kind of tells you that everyone's assuming this is going back to the Stone Age.
Yeah, I actually brought out my shortwave radio, the one that I carried all over the Middle East during the time I was there covering Israel and Egypt and Lebanon. I had a shortwave radio. It was the only way we could hear what was going on. I pulled it out, stuck some batteries in it, and fiddled around with it. I actually posted a story on that. I think it's in tomorrow's newsletter as well. I think that's a very interesting thing. But the BBC has also decided that it's going to close down what it's doing in Russia for coverage, but it's not pulling its people out, which I found interesting.
Cloudflare today published a graph of internet use in Ukraine since February 21st that showed very consistent use, daytime, nighttime, peaks and troughs without a declining trend. So it looks as if the internet is still functioning.
Let me ask you this question about the internet. One of the things that's going on is that the major platforms are putting their thumbs on the scale and suppressing disinformation from Russia and by Russian allies in a way that they hadn't in the past, in a way that they didn't, for instance, in the 2016 US election. And that's something that is possible in a world of big platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Google and Twitter. If we move to something like Web3, where everything is decentralized, wouldn't that be an advantage to Putin?
Yes, and to everyone else, though. The problem with the platforms today, it's an interesting conversation, but my observation is, apart from Binance and Coinbase, pretty much everyone has become an agent of government. And you say they're stopping Russian disinformation, but they're also stopping Russian information. They're stopping information and disinformation. And by the way, they're broadcasting US disinformation. In other words, they've become agents of the war. And in war, truth is the first casualty, and all sides resort to propaganda, all sides.
So if that plays right into the fact that Anonymous announced today that they were going to hack everything in Russia that they could. And that seems to me to be worth noting.
I mean, I don't know what I would do, but I do know that you can't trust anything from any side as being true.
No, well, that I think that's a good thing.
Probably, it could be.
Okay, so
It depends if you have a side. I mean, my only side is with ordinary Ukrainians. So, what's the best outcome for ordinary Ukrainians?
well, there's a certain amount, when you have 141 countries going one way and like 6 going the other way, I'll go with 141.
No, I think countries are the wrong organizing principle to understand anything, because they all have looking at it as, if we're human beings first and Americans or British or whatever we are second, I think we have an obligation to look at everything from a human point of view before we look at it from a national point of view.
I'm just talking about, a simple understanding of media tends to maybe you think devolve, I would think stabilize into choices. And if I had to make a choice there, I'd make a choice based on, for this purpose, for this time, for this situation, I'd go with a coalition rather than, whatever it is that is going on in Russia.
I always go the other way. I always remember this phrase, the main enemy is at home. I can't do anything to Putin, but if something wrong happens here, I can. So my job as an American is to look at what we're doing and criticize that. A Russian's job is to look at what Putin's doing and criticize that. It's so easy to become nationalistic and only focus on the enemy. But if the main enemy is at home, and in war, there's always bad actors on all sides. And this war is not, caused by Putin, but Putin took the decision to invade. We have some culpability as well. So the truth is much more complex than taking sides.
I understand,
Excuse me?
Well, go ahead.
I dissent.
Yeah, I mean, Putin, it is Putin's war. Putin started it, and we don't have any culpability in it. You can make Putin's case that we expanded NATO, but you know what? Putin's country lost the Cold War.
I don't.
We did what was in our best interest, and that's what real politics is all about. That's all we should be focused on.
But Dennis, go back to the Orange Revolution and the banning of the Russian language as a minority language in Ukraine, supported by NATO. Did that have anything to do with what happened?
Supported by who?
By the way, that was a coup. Ukraine isn't democratic. It was a military coup.
Not right now, not right now.
I mean,
In 2014,
Ukraine,
they got rid of the military coup.
Yeah, well, let's be honest. Ukraine banned the Russian language, and there was a coup against an elected government because the elected government was too friendly to Russia.
Well, you just said there was a coup, and now you're saying it's an elected government.
Before the coup.
The history of Ukraine is complex, and there are many forces inside Ukraine and outside of Ukraine that have been influencing it as far back as we can trace it. that there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And there have been, and it has not been particularly stable since the fall of the Soviet Union. It has moved back and forth. But the fact remains that Russia currently under Putin wants to reclaim it. He has said numerous times that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the dissolution of the USSR, and he's been trying to undo that. That's the big dynamic that's working here. He wants to get it back. What happens inside of Ukraine is almost besides the point. He just wants to have it.
Well, I don't think that's in debate, and clearly, we all want Ukraine to win against the invasion, so that isn't really even in debate. But it is worth discussing why it happened.
It is,
and should the Ukrainian people, when they are blaming somebody for what's happening to them, only look one way? No, I don't think so. I think they
well, if what's happening to them is an invasion, I think that you do have to look one way. You have to look at the invader.
Yeah, but you also have to look the other way at what were the events leading up to that.
You know what? There aren't that many historians who are willing to do that in Ukraine right now. They're all carrying guns. The proximate cause of the hardship is a Russian invasion with tanks and aircraft and helicopter.
No one did, of course.
So,
that's why this flag.
So I think it's ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous, to start going back in history and talking about what the other causes might be. I mean,
well, I think that going back in history and looking at some of the things that may not be the current narrative, to try and understand why we're here in a totality, is valuable. I don't think that it's an answer to how we stay out of a world war, stay out of a nuclear conflict, and there are much more pressing issues as a result, in my opinion, of an invasion by the former Soviet Union.
I totally agree with that. I mean,
all of what we're talking about, what we should be talking about is the people that are affected by this war, and we're not going to be able to create a no-fly zone. We're not going to be able to be the ones that are going to make a difference in Russia, but we can make a difference to those people on the ground. And I encourage, because this is what, for example, my wife and I are doing, and this is just a small example of what I think a lot of people should be doing, is we've collected clothes and stuff from everyone in our building, put them into boxes and taken them to the Ukraine Collection Center, along with money that we're putting in through one of the credit cards here in the UK called Revolut, which is matching your donations, which I think is, at least I feel somehow that I'm doing my small part. And when I can't sit and watch my wife just cry every time a news story comes on, and I say to her, you've got to turn that off. You've got to stop watching that. And she won't, because she's drawn to it. And if everyone is drawn to it that way, then maybe people will start to help. And that's one of the things that I think that Putin will have to deal with in his own mind.
Frank, I think that's wonderful, and I think everybody should be finding ways to reach out. I noticed today that Volodymyr Zelensky is asking Europe, especially, but really the whole world, to make some commotion, make statements, make a fuss. So my question is, how do we do that? How do we do that? And who are we directing it to? If we're directing these messages to Russia and they're not getting through, how do we get through? How do we protest, or what form does it take to make some sort of statements that matter?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't have an answer for that question other than that we all need to do whatever we can to help the people on the ground in the Ukraine. And
I think if
that,
you go back,
Hang on a second. I need to, we have a time issue here. Keith, I'm sorry, both Keith and Brent have to leave at the top of the hour, which is about 6 minutes from now. So Brent, anything you want to add to this?
It's a situation that everybody's talking about, but there's very few solutions. And I don't see anything I could add to this conversation. I thought it was a really good one. I just like how Frank, kind of ended it with that kind of call to do whatever you can. It's just a frustrating thing watching what you see, and you kind of know where it's going, and there's really no way to stop it because you're dealing with someone who's pretty much a madman with lots of tools at his disposal. Doesn't seem to care if it ruins his country. Doesn't seem to care about the people in his country. He just cares about saying, I don't know, I recreated the old Soviet Union. But what is that? I mean, what is it today? I don't know. So that's all I can really add to this. It's really just a frustrating kind of situation.
And Keith, you wanted to
just a couple of things. I mean, I think the easiest way for an American to understand Putin is to think of an extreme Southern Christian militant. He's a Russian nationalist and a Christian that believes in Greater Russia. He's not a communist of any kind. He's a former policeman, a Secret Service policeman. And so he's not mad, he's just who he is. And he represents, talking to what Steve said, which I totally agree with, which is the biggest thing here is not to stumble into a larger conflict. Well, for that to happen, what Zelensky said today, which is when asked, he said he wants to talk to Putin. And the journalist said, do you want to talk to Putin? And his answer was, I have to talk to Putin because Putin is the only person that can solve this.
Yeah, but
and what he was really saying there is, look, no matter what you think of this country and this person, the way to de-escalate this conflict is to engage, not disengage. It's the only way, actually.
You make a point about
it may be impossible. It may be impossible.
Okay, Frank, go ahead.
He wasn't just a policeman or a Secret Service guy. He was a spy, and he was a liar because that's what they do in the KGB and the FSB.
Sure.
And so for me, and I've said this like to lots of people up and down the line, that a meeting between the two minds is going to be a one-sided lie. And no matter how you look at it, and I just, if you look at that meeting with Macron, look at those meetings
but
with
Frank. How do you de-escalate then?
Well,
assuming none of us want to escalate,
yeah.
How do you de-escalate?
I don't know.
I think the answer, unfortunately, and I think you've already mentioned it, is all with Putin. So Putin will either have to achieve his goal, he will have to settle for not achieving his goal, or he will have to be removed. Removing Putin seems to be magical thinking. But if this is Putin's war and Putin has control of the Russian resources, then Putin is the way out.
No,
and it's either up to Putin or it's up to the rest of the people in Russia.
There's one option nobody's talking about.
Pardon?
There's one option that nobody's talking about. And I think the way to Putin is through China.
Okay, well, you got 2 minutes to explain that.
Xi Jinping and Putin just signed a friendship agreement. Xi Jinping is not 100% on board with, in fact, he's way against the Ukrainian invasion. He hasn't said very much publicly, but I think if you were to lobby the Chinese and get them on your side, probably strike a deal of some sort, the Chinese could go to Putin and say, hey, knock it off.
Do you
I
think they
think
have
that-
that? Do you think they have that much leverage with Putin?
I think they've got more leverage than Macron,
Well, you think
Yeah,
that,
Boris Johnson, and Joe
Well, I
Biden.
also, they certainly have more leverage than the Russian people do.
And
Yeah.
India may be in that, may be a part of that formula. Think about the two countries that that abstained from the vote and the UN Security Council. I think that's a really interesting thing. But let's not forget, China's also got its eyes set on Taiwan. I don't know where that goes.
Look, I think China's gonna stay out of this. I don't see any upside for China in doing anything other than keeping quiet on the sidelines. And you know, whilst people fight, it's exactly what the American nation did in World War I and World War II. When Germany invaded Poland, the US wasn't going to do anything about that. Britain eventually had to when it came west. America waited until the combatants were relatively exhausted and came in as the strongest economic power to you know, end it, if you like. China plays the role of America on the world stage today. It's the assumed future winner that has no interest in a fight whatsoever. Unfortunately, Putin is playing the role of Germany, you know, the
very Hitlerian.
destabilizer. And you know, Ukraine is Poland, if you want. It's obviously not literally exactly the same, but there's some parallels there. And I honestly think that Putin probably, you can't think about defeating him unless you're prepared to go to world war.
Yeah.
And I definitely you know, don't think that's anything the world should want to do. So
but I think,
therefore you have to
but we
accommodate.
are
You have to
we are in
accommodate.
it.
30 seconds.
Don't you think we are already at war with Putin economically, not militarily, but
we shouldn't
but
want
the
to
but
be.
the but the
No,
world.
we are, but we shouldn't want to be. It doesn't go to a good place.
Yeah.
Well, not wanting to be sounds like unilateral disarmament. That doesn't work.
No, we've got to figure out what is a reasonable, you know, what is reasonable for the world to accept when it comes to Russia's borders.
Mad. Mutually assured destruction.
Okay, that's it. I want to thank our producer and director, Tina Chase Gillmor.
Wow, guys, I didn't think that you could make some sense or elaborate on this. And it was great. And I appreciate all of you.
I want to thank Keith Tier,
Go
Dr.
Ukraine.
Keith here.
Brent
Doctor,
Leary,
Up with Dennis Pombriant. He's my favorite.
he's trying to neutralize you, Dennis. Thanks to Dennis Pombriant.
Thank you.
Thanks to Michael Markman.
Thank you.
And thanks to Frank Radis.
Thanks, guys. Very interesting conversation. One that needed to happen here in the gang.
I
Cool.
agree. Thanks to everybody who showed up and especially those who couldn't. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So long.